Excellent, good. Okay, yes. So let's get started then. So this session, as John said, is really kind of geared up for those of you who are new into the role. You might just literally be straight into it. You might have just gone through sort of some or all of the year-end process that's just happened. But the intention here really is to give you sort of an overview of all the things to think about within the finance role, given that as a clerk, you're wearing lots and lots of hats, you might have confidence in other parts of the role. Finance and the numbers might not be your happy place. So this is just intended to be that kind of introduction, those first thoughts about things to consider. And then also at the end, we'll talk about some ways to get some sort of help and advice as well. So starting off then, just with an introduction to local council accounting, wanted to start right at the beginning to give us a feel for the things that we need to be mindful of when we're thinking about collating our financial information for our council. So then I've defined our parish town council as an elected body at the first level of local government, makes decisions on behalf of the parish and has a wide range of powers relating to local matters. So from that, the considerations that I've got there at the bottom, firstly, transparency. If we're dealing with public funds, we're obtaining a precept to do all these services within our area. We want to be transparent about how we're spending that money, give that good financial information so people can see what's going on. We need to provide the services in an efficient manner. So that's making sure that we've got enough money to provide them, but also they're being done efficiently. Are we using the appropriate contractors? Are things being done correctly? Obviously setting the precept, and as John mentioned, we have a whole session about that kind of at the back end, sort of September, October time, once we get to thinking about that, because there's loads of considerations there as well. So it's making sure that we set an appropriate precept. We want to make sure we've got enough money coming in to do all the things that we want to do within the council, but equally that we're not taking too much. We don't want to end up with a surplus for which we then don't have a plan of how to spend it. And management of reserves. So there is a relationship there as well about our reserves, our precept and budgets. And again, that's something we cover later on, but making sure we've got enough in reserves to cover any unexpected situations in our day-to-day running of our council, but also to do other projects and things within our parish and area. This is then where you come in as the clerk or the RFO. So every local authority is required to appoint an officer to be responsible for the administration of their council's financial affairs, so obviously the RFO, and often that is a role held by a clerk as well, particularly if you're a smaller council, you might just be the single employee of the council, possibly as well working part-time hours, which is why there's so many pressures in so many different areas. The responsibilities include within that following proper financial procedures, so making sure things are being done correctly, having those internal control and audit systems. So again, these are all the things, making sure the council's doing things correctly, things in the correct way. And then once you get to that year end, as part of the internal audit, they'll be checking that, the annual governance statement, being able to say yes to those assertions that yes, you are doing things as you should be. Reporting to the council on the spending and the current position. So making sure that you've got good, timely, accurate financial information so that you can give them that information in order that they can then make those decisions, understand what's going on, allow you to do all those things I've just mentioned there as well. And obviously, as well, as we've mentioned, completing the AGAR for the year, the 1st of April to the 31st of March. So that's a really, really big element of the role as well. If you're really new into post, then you won't have done that yet. So that's something that's something to look forward to for next year. And again, we have a big session on that once we get to that time of the year. So at this point as well, if you're new into post, I'd strongly recommend that you go and have a look at your council's financial regulations, because that will take you through the things that should be happening, that you should be doing, the information you should be providing within what respect. Somebody sent a question in beforehand about the reporting element of this. So you'd need to have a look at what you need to provide in terms of whether you're reporting on a quarterly basis against your budgets, and making sure that you're giving that information in an appropriate way. So make sure that you do have a look at your financial regulations and what is expected. Generally, in terms of going to your financial meetings, I would be taking a bank reconciliation, so to confirm that the data that you've got in your cash book is reconciling to the bank, a list of your payments that you're proposing to make for payment approval, possibly a list of things that have gone previously so that you can see what went through in the last month, and something that allows then a budget versus actual comparison. So to see where you are, particularly if you're finding you've got some variances that you may then want to flag up. If anything untoward is cropped up unexpected, then giving that information so that potentially corrective action can be taken as well. Okay, it's also as well as important, particularly again, if you're new, just to understand what accounting approach you're going to be using when you're collating your financial information. This is something that crops up regularly. Often people come and join us at Scribe and we'll ask the question, which accounting approach do you use? Sometimes they don't know, sometimes they confidently give us an answer, and then it transpires it's the other one anyway. So receipts and payments, as it says there, simple form of accounts in that the receipts and payments are recorded at the time which were they received or paid. Now, I always say simply what happened, when it happened, regardless of when it relates to. So it's pretty simplistic. And if you're coming from a sort of a stronger financial background, it can almost seem too simple because you're simply putting in what happened when it happened. And actually, I heard from quite a few people this year who received their precept payment that would normally come in April. They got it in March, and therefore they had to record it in last year's financial figures for the AGAR because they're recording what happened when it happened, and they received the precept payment, albeit for this financial year, they received it at the end of last year. And then we've got income and expenditure. So that considers the period to which the transactions relate to rather than simply when they occurred. Now that's more in line with sort of business accounting, something that you may and be more au fait with if you or your counsellors have a stronger financial background. It's worth saying though that if you do use income and expenditure, you're absolutely fine to run on a receipts and payments basis throughout the year with the conversion to income and expenditure for the AGAR, so the accounting statements at the end of the year. With regards to which approach you need to be using, if you're under 200k, so that's total income or expenditure, if either of them are under 200k, if either of them are over 200k, you would need to be income and expenditure, but that's only when there's 3 consecutive years. So you may find if you ever go over that threshold, or in 1 or 2 years, maybe you have a large SIL payment or the grant comes in that pushes you over that threshold. If that doesn't continue for 3 consecutive years, you wouldn't have to move to income and expenditure. Having said all that, you can be a small council and opt to use income and expenditure. And as I said, that can sometimes happen if the councillors or the clerk have a strong financial background. They may be more comfortable with using that approach. It's also important just to bear in mind as well that if you do find your council needs to move between approaches in financial year, you would need to be mindful of restating the prior year as well. So when you come to complete the year end, you have to produce the current year and the prior year, and both years must use the same accounting approach. So that's something to consider just if you ever find yourself in that scenario where you are needing to move between the accounting approach that you're using to record the end of year transactions. Okay, so we've talked about why our good financial information is so important, all the reasons that we need that information, how we're going to record it, but this is about those good procedures to be keeping on top of that financial information. It's all about the cash book then. As it says there, the cash book is the most important accounting record for local councils. So whether it is a spreadsheet or software, hopefully not a ledger book anymore, but something that you've got to put all that information into to get good information out of. It's about, if you put good information in, then you'll get good information out. So it sounds reasonably self-explanatory, but it's just that reminder and that sort of encouragement to do this on a regular basis. So regular recording of your transactions, making sure you're splitting out the VAT, and I'll talk about that in a little while. Making sure you've got that full audit trail. So you've got the invoices that go along with your payments and you've got all that information there that goes together. There's regular bank reconciliations to confirm the data that you're putting into your cash books correct, so ideally on a monthly basis. And just as you're doing it, thinking about, can I produce timely and useful information easily? So particularly if you've just gone through the end of year and you found it really hard or onerous, or so I kept having to check certain things, or I didn't have information that I needed, can you improve your cash book to make it more user-friendly, to get the information out more easily? So just some things there to think about as you use your cash book and as you use it more, particularly if you're really new. Is your accounting system fit for purpose? So not only for you using it, putting information into it, Are you able to back it up easily? Can you share information easily with your councillors? If the laptop blew up, do you have a copy? Is there a hard copy somewhere else? Do you need training on it? And that's something that we hear all the time of your people new into post, and they just get a laptop and a pile of paper and off they go to work out what's going on. And that obviously can be really, really tough, trying to pick up from where someone else has left off. Does it suit the needs of your council? So is it working for you and the information that you want them to provide? And this might be something that you don't yet necessarily know the answer to, because when you're new into post, you just continue doing what's been done previously most of the time. If somebody tells you I do it like this, or you pick up something else that someone's done, you continue to do so. But later on down the line, you might review that. And once you understand a little bit more about what you're trying to achieve, you can then review it and think, hang on a minute, this might not be the best way or the most appropriate way that I'm doing things, and maybe I can make improvements. So be mindful of that as you do things, because once you get to the year end and that really busy time, if you can make the cash book work as well as for you as possible, then it makes life that much easier, and for your internal auditor as well. Little extract there from Scribe just to show a bank rec, just to make sure you're putting that information, seeing that bit at the bottom where it checks out so it balances, just as I said, on a monthly basis, ideally, just to make sure that everything's being recorded accurately. And then in terms of the actual cash book then, and how you're going to structure it, so we've talked about how important it is to regularly update it, get all that information in. So as it says there, again, sort of reasonably self-explanatory potentially, but to base it on your council budget or your precept breakdown. Now, we see quite often that a council will come along to Scribe and they'll have a really lovely budget sheet, and it will be broken down into their budget lines or their budget codes with budget amounts against them. But then they've got a cash book that bears no resemblance to that budget. So being able to say, what have we spent against this budget line is actually really, really hard. And if somebody came and said, well, how much does it cost us to run the village hall? It's not immediately obvious. So it's important to think about what we're trying to report on from the information from our cash book. So as it says there, I'd suggest that you allocate out your transactions out to those budget codes. And if you want to provide information on certain sections or areas, you group them together so that you can see how much income you're getting from the village hall versus how much it's costing you to run it, for example. So again, when we're thinking about your cash book, think about, could I improve it? So do I want additional codes? If you're grouping things together, so everything just goes into a pot called admin, but actually it'd be really useful to know how much you spend on phone bills or stationery or the printer or whatever it may be. Do you want to break it down a little bit more? Or have you inherited something that's got a great long list of codes, some of which you never use? So actually you could consolidate it and tidy it up a little bit more. And it's also about making sure you've got as much information as you can in the cash book. So that's thinking about putting VAT numbers in, invoice numbers. So if your supplier phones up and says, have you paid this invoice? You can easily look that information up without having to rifle back through paperwork from months ago, for example. So just as much as you can into that cash book on a regular basis. Okay. And there's a little extract again from Scribe just to show you then, once we've done all that, put that information in, then you can get information out. So I can run something to see what on my budget, for example, in my administration at my town hall, and I can see how much it's costing me in each of these areas so that we can review that information at our council meetings. So just as a brief summary on the cash book then, just about regular time to keep it up to date, regular bank reconciliations, and very briefly in there as well, just a recognition that if you are the single employee of the council, it can sometimes feel really isolating, and sometimes you just want to ask a question about something, and sometimes it's nice to have that opportunity to do so. So we have got a Facebook group where you can do so, but I've got some links right at the end of this section of slide that talks about some really helpful resources as well. Okay, so I mentioned that a little bit in there about recording it separately, and a session such as this has to have VAT in it, because obviously there is so much sort of fear and scaring about VAT as well, because people, as soon as you hear VAT, you think, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with it all? And we've got lots and lots of questions about it as well. So this little section about VAT is sort of an overview, a top level really. There's lots and lots of things to consider with VAT. So if you think your council might be in a slightly complex VAT position, I'd always recommend that you take specialist VAT advice. But this is just to give you sort of some things to think about initially with regards to your council. Okay, it's also worth mentioning that some of the things around VAT and actually for finances in general are different and specifics for different for councils as outside of businesses. So if you've come from a business background, or your councillors have, and they think they know the rules regarding VAT or accounts and things like that, it's important to remember that's not all true. In the same respect for town and parish councils, things are a little bit different, so be mindful of that as well. Okay, so firstly then, non-VAT registered council. So if you are a council who is just receiving the precept and other bits of ad hoc income, odd grant here, a bit of interest, etc., and haven't got any other sort of taxable supplies or services you're providing, then you won't be VAT registered. However, you can claim back the VAT on your payments using Form 126 on the HMRC website. So you can log on with your government gateway ID to do that. Now, if you haven't got that information, potentially you can do it by post if you need to until you get set up with that information. Now, there's no specific timing for claims in the same way that if you're VAT registered, you're governed very strictly by return dates, but you do need to claim for complete calendar months. And if the claim is less than £100, it must be for a full financial or full year. Okay, so do be mindful of that and making sure that you're collating that information separately so you can easily produce that claim. I would recommend that you do it on a regular basis. So ideally, if it's only annually, I would do it to the 31st of March because it keeps it in line with year end. And you might think, well, that's more work to do, but actually it makes life that bit easier if you keep it all together and it tallies up with everything that you're doing with regards to the year end. If you're a little bit bigger and you've got a bit more going on, you might want to get into a habit of doing it 6 monthly or quarterly. But if you can do it on a regular basis, it tends to make life that bit easier because you will easily be then able to recognise on the calendar when you should be doing it. And if you're ever in a scenario where you leave the role, it's very easy for somebody to pick up where they left off and see that you did it on a quarterly basis, for example. Also worth remembering that you can go back and claim historically if it hasn't been done for a while, so if you need to look at that as well, that's worth looking into. So if you come into the role and think don't think any VAT's been reclaimed for a while, then do look back and see what you can find out. Obviously there'll be a compromise between how much time it's going to take you to collate the information if it's not particularly good and how much VAT you might be able to reclaim, but it's certainly worth looking into if the claim hasn't been run for a while. Okay. Bill extract again just from Scribe about the information that HMRC would want in terms of the VAT. So if you put all that information in, making sure you're recording that VAT number and that VAT separately, then you can get that information to come back out so that you can then send that off to claim that VAT back. Don't know if you can hear that, but I've got a really loud person drilling next door. So I hope it's not affecting things, but I'm just going to try and talk that a little bit louder. Okay, so VAT registered councils then next. So this would be where you do have an additional regular source of income besides the precepts, such as I put there, such as running a car park. And that means you will need to submit VAT returns. Now, normally that would be on a quarterly basis, possibly monthly. And it's just worth mentioning as well that ideally, I would suggest that you want to try and get your VAT returns to run alongside the financial year. So that Q4 does finish on the 31st of March. If you're in a scenario where that's not the case, then you can log on to your VAT account with your government gateway ID and request to change it, because again, it makes life that bit easier if they do run in line. So you need to submit your VAT returns via software using Making Tax Digital. When it came initially, it was optional for councils, now mandatory. So you would need that software to collate that information to submit those VAT returns to HMRC. So do be mindful of that if you're in a scenario where you think VAT registration might be necessary, that you are going to need some software to allow you to do that. So also mentioning as well that I haven't particularly covered here, something to think about, that if you are a council that provides services that aren't VATable, so exempt services, for example, hiring out rooms, because that's often what happens if you have a building, a hall, and you hire out rooms as well. There is considerations here too, that you can claim the VAT back, but if it's a business activity, there is a limit to how much you can claim. So be mindful of that. You may find yourself going over the threshold if you spend a lot of money on providing those services. So if you find yourself refurbishing or building work, significant building works that then incurs a lot of cost and therefore VAT, it may be an issue that you would I would strongly suggest you take specialist VAT advice for. So do be mindful of that if that's a scenario you might find yourself in as well. So a summary on the VAT then, making sure firstly that your cash book and you're recording it separately in there, and making sure you've got your paperwork so that the invoice has the VAT number on, it has the amount that's being charged. If it's really long and onerous to produce those VAT claims or collate the information for your VAT returns, again, it's about thinking about how can I improve my cash book to make that a little bit better. Okay. And then, so talked mainly about so far about the cash book, all those transactions in there, reports that come out of it, the bank reconciliations, but there are some other levels and bits of financial information that's important to record as well as part of all your financial information within the council. Firstly is your asset register, and that's your record of your council's tangible assets. So firstly, it's your supporting information for box 9 of the accounting statements on the AGAR. So if you've just gone through the year-end process, you would needed to put a valuation in your box 9 figure for your assets. Normally that's the purchase value, but potentially might be your current value depending on the valuation method your council has adopted. So you would need your asset register for that. It's also a record of your assets for your insurance purposes as well. So you need to have that information for your insurance. And it also allows you to manage your assets. So where are they? Where would I find them? How am I maintaining them? Do they need inspections? Do I need to go and service them or somebody to service them? And also renewals as well. So being mindful of when you might need to renew your fixed assets is really important. So again, when we think about budgeting and forecasting later on, we may need to factor in replacing fixed assets as well and being mindful of that as part of it. So that's also useful information to hold in our asset register. Again, there are specific rules for councils. So again, you might be aware of depreciation and presuming that you buy an asset and it depreciates. Not the case. You would simply purchase it. It would go on your asset register. It remains on there until which time you dispose of it. If you have any disposal proceeds, you sell it for something, it goes in as income. So the key information that you're going to be recording in your asset register at the very least is the date of acquisition. When did you buy it? When did you acquire it? Obviously, you might not know the specific date because if it's really, really old, had it a long time. You've got the cost of acquisition. How much did it actually cost you to purchase it? If it was gifted to you or it's a community asset, you just record the proxy £1. Where is it? So what's the location of it? And what's its useful life? So again, it's useful to know that information because when you're thinking about budgeting, factor in needing to replace that asset as well. So again, you want to make sure you're keeping it updated for additions and disposals. So if you buy new assets, making sure they're put on your asset register. If you're disposing of things, you're updating it. So when you come to box 9, you've got your accurate figure and any other missing or useful information. So if you have the opportunity, often we hear from people who say my asset register's missing quite a lot of information, and sometimes people can say I've gone out and actually found assets that we've got on this asset register that simply don't exist anymore. You know, they've been scrapped, we didn't realise, and they've gone and around and sort of tidied it up and got it to be as accurate as it can be. And then we've also got our reserves as well. So this is another key element of our council financial information. I mentioned right at the start as well, making sure that we're maintaining appropriate levels of reserves. So as it says there, essentials that councils have adequate reserves to cover both their day-to-day running and financial obligations as well as future projects. So making sure that they've got council funds if there are any issues. If you've got cash flow problems, if something unexpected happens, can you cover that scenario? But also, are you able to plan ahead? So are you able to plan for things to happen in your parish? Reserves should be reviewed and justified at least annually. So you need to make sure that you're considering, you know, what your reserves are they appropriate? And particularly as well, if you've got a high level of reserves, if you had a large box 7 figure at the end of last year, so your funds carried forward and it was more than double box 2, the precept, you would have needed to explain that to the external auditor. And that's absolutely fine if you can, and you've got appropriate things that you've got in reserve for certain purposes. But obviously you need to be really mindful if you're ending up with budget surpluses each year, maybe the precept's that little bit too high and you're ending up with a high level of reserves. So you've got your general reserves, that's how to cover unexpected events or cash flow problems. So if the precept's not paid on time or something unexpected happens, you find yourself needing to pay out for something unexpectedly. And that should be equivalent between 3 and 12 months expenditure. So more if you're smaller, less if you're larger, but that's then going to cover any unexpected issues. You've got your earmarked reserves held for specific purposes or projects. So that might be things such as we're going to install a play park, we're going to do some projects in the area, but also for specific purposes. So you may have reserves that you use to flatline the budget. So things like election costs, every year you put some money into that pot of reserves, and then you can use that to help you flatline the budget. And again, that's something that we go into in much more detail once we get to thinking about budgeting later on in the financial year. And then we've got capital reserves. That's fixed assets and proceeds. If you dispose of over 10k, you need to use it just for capital reserves, enhancement of fixed assets or repayments of loans. As I mentioned, there is no upper limit for earmarked or capital reserves, but you must be able to justify them and you need to explain them. So it's really important to understand what you've got in reserves and make sure it's appropriate. And as I said, if you do find yourself with surpluses, like understanding how you're going to use that money, because obviously this is council funds that you're holding. And if you haven't got a plan for it, then that potentially is a real problem. Okay, I'm really sorry if that impacted you. It certainly impacted me and I feel like my brain is like vibrating or something. But just to finish off, just some useful resources of places to get help if you need it, because as I said, mentioning if it can be a lonely role and sometimes it feels like you don't necessarily know who to ask or where best to get some support from. So the JPAG Practitioner's Guide, which has the proper practice for governance and accounting, it's, as I put there, the Bible for completing the AGAR. So definitely have that, but also useful for checking things as you record transactions and things throughout the financial year itself as well. The auditors can be a good place. Your internal auditor, advice on good practices and compliance. The external auditors aren't going to give specific advice, but they do generally have good information on their website about what needs to be completed, particularly with year end. VAT 749 has guidance from HMRC on VAT for local authority. So that's a really good starting place if you feel a bit out of your depth with VAT. That's a really good one to have a look at to start with. And then we've got SLCC, which is support and advice of clerks, NELC, interest of town and parish councils, your local ALC. So hopefully you're members of all of them. And if you need some sort of further advice, training, support, access to any specialists such as VAT, as I talked about, they're really good people to put you in the right, point you in the right direction. And then the Facebook group, the Clerks Corner, wealth of information in there, but also support. So even if you want to go on there and just put a post on saying, I've had a really tough day, week, month, whatever, you'll get lots and lots of sympathy and empathy from other people who know how you feel. So that's a really nice place to go as well. Lovely. I'm going to stop there.
Hi, I'm Nathan at Scribe, and in this video today I'm going to show you an easier way of managing your accounts by using our accounts package. I speak to hundreds of customers every single year and they tell me about all the different benefits that they feel they'll gain by moving over to Scribe. And some of those main benefits I want to run through for you in this video today so that you can understand how Scribe can help you with the management of your accounts. I want to start by talking about how to do year-end in Scribe. Scribe will produce your year-end documents whether you're working in receipts and payments or income and expenditure. Starting with receipts and payments, we can jump into annual return to generate your AGAR in just one click. You can use the filter to get a breakdown of all the figures that go into boxes 3 through to 6, and that will be the same on income and expenditure as well. You've then got your explanation of variances. In here, Scribe will tell you all of your variances and their percentages and give you text boxes for which ones require any explanations. We can use the explanation report to then get the populated report with all of the explanations that we input. You'll also have your asset register included within Scribe as well in both receipts and payments and income and expenditure. This can be imported from a spreadsheet and will keep track of the acquisition date, their values, and give you the ability to set their locations as well using the What 3 Words website. As mentioned a moment ago, your explanation of variances and your AGAR are both still possible in income and expenditure in Scribe. In addition to that, you have your reports for reconciliation between boxes 7 and 8, your income and expenditure account, and your working document as well for showing the effects of your adjustments on current and previous years. Next, I want to talk about reserves in Scribe. In the reserves section, you'll be able to generate your reserves balance report, which populate from assigning cost codes to the named reserves that you would have set up. In here, this will give you your breakdown between your capital and earmarked reserves with their transfers, their spend, and their current balances as well. Scribe will also help when it comes to budgeting by giving you some really helpful reports that are going to allow you to see your data a lot more easily. Mainly in the budgeting report, this is going to give you your 3-year spread between your current and your previous year's budgets and actuals, along with a comparison into the next financial year, if you've opened that year and set your budgets. You also then have your monthly report. This will give you a breakdown of your actuals per month of the financial year, along with your variance displayed for each cost code along the right-hand side. Scribe's fully compatible with the Making Tax Digital portal, and for our customers that are VAT registered, they'll be able to link with the MTD portal so that when they come in and generate their VAT 100, they can customise the period of the reclaim that they're doing and submit it directly to HMRC without leaving Scribe. If you're not VAT registered, it's a similar process. You can jump straight into VAT, generate your 126, again setting the date range of the reclaim that you're generating at the top right. Within the transactions section of Scribe, this is where you can of course log your payments and receipts and set up regular payments and receipts as well. Some of the information included in here is the ability to record a minute reference to tie it to a particular meeting. Also record powers used for spend relating to that transaction and log them as awaiting authorization or as a section 137 transaction. And you can of course within a single transaction break it down between different cost centers and cost codes and VAT types if needed. With your invoicing in Scribe under the transactions section, you can come to sales invoices to raise any new invoices. However, if you're using any of our additional products for bookings, cemetery, or managing your allotments, then the activity that you do in those additional products will raise the invoices into Scribe accounts for you. They can then be emailed directly from this system. If we hit actions and then send email, I can select as many of my invoices as I wish to send them all out in one big bulk email. All of the email templates in regards to this are fully customizable and set up by you. From our main website here at scribeaccounts.com is where you can actually come to sign into Scribe, as it's a fully cloud-based, purpose-built app for parish, town and community councils. You'll also find some of your channels for support here, with your help guides available for each of our modules, where our support team hosts live webinars that you're able to join in on the Q&A. One-to-one support is also available through the app, and all of your channels for support are included in your annual license for Scribe. I hope I've been able to show you an easier way of managing your accounts using Scribe. If you would like some more information or to run through in more detail on a one-to-one session, I'll be more than happy to set that up for you. Just reach out and we're more than happy to give you a demonstration of our accounts package or any of our additional products. Thank you for watching.